The sun had just begun to dip behind the skyline of a small American town, painting the cracked streets with long shadows, when Victoria Hale, a young woman in her late 20s, stepped out of her luxury sedan and onto the worn pavement of a modest auto repair shop. She had arrived on a whim, seeking a bit of amusement and a break from the polished world she was so used to, a world filled with designer clothes, high-end restaurants, and endless Instagram-worthy moments. Life for Victoria had always been about appearances and power, about wealth and influence. But that evening, bored and slightly curious, she decided to have some fun. She would ask someone utterly ordinary for advice and watch them squirm, maybe even laugh. Little did she know, her plan would lead her into the heart of something far bigger than herself. Victoria entered the shop, the scent of engine oil and gasoline immediately filling her senses. Behind the counter stood a man about her age, lean and strong from years of labor. His name was Matthew Carson, and the rough calluses on his hands told stories of endless hours spent fixing engines and earning a living the hard way. His brown hair was streaked with gray, and his tired eyes carried a quiet humility, a stark contrast to the arrogance she was accustomed to seeing in her own world. Victoria smirked, deciding to play her part. She leaned casually against a rusted car, her expensive heels squeaking faintly against the concrete. "I have a question," she said, her tone teasing. "I need some financial advice, and I thought, why not ask a mechanic? You know, someone who probably barely makes enough to pay rent." Matthew looked at her without the slightest flicker of offense. Instead, he nodded politely, wiping his hands on a rag before gesturing toward a nearby chair. "Sit down. I'll listen." Victoria chuckled inwardly, preparing to deliver her clever remark, but something about the way he spoke, so calm and genuine, made her pause. As she sat, Matthew leaned back slightly, his eyes thoughtful. Then, with a voice quiet but steady, he began. "Financial advice isn't really about numbers or investments," he said. "It's about choices. Every day you choose what you spend your time on, what you care about, what you're willing to fight for. Money comes and goes, but what you build with integrity, with honesty, with kindness, that lasts." Victoria blinked, caught off guard. She had expected arrogance, or a nervous shrug, maybe even a laugh. Not this, not wisdom that cut through her self-satisfied facade like sunlight through fog. She listened, leaning in without realizing it. He continued, sharing small stories from his life. How he had grown up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, how he had learned early that hard work and honesty could take him further than shortcuts ever could. How he had lost money on investments that looked promising because he had trusted appearances over principles. And how, despite being labeled poor by the world, he had built a life filled with respect, friendship, and a sense of purpose he saw too few people chase. Victoria felt a strange lump forming in her throat. Each word struck her like a ripple through her carefully constructed world. She realized painfully how often she had measured herself against the wrong things: wealth, status, recognition, ignoring the deeper, quieter successes that mattered most. Matthew spoke of humility and courage, of generosity and resilience, as if he had known her entire life and her hidden insecurities. By the time he finished, the sky outside had darkened, and the neon sign of his shop flickered softly. Victoria's eyes were damp, her smile gone, replaced by a heavy awareness. She had come in for a joke, but she left with a lesson that felt like a gift and a challenge. If this story already makes you feel the power of kindness and second chances, go ahead and hit like, comment, share, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The next few weeks were a quiet awakening for Victoria. She found herself thinking about Matthew's words constantly, about how she spent her days and what truly mattered. She started small, helping a struggling local charity, reaching out to old friends she had neglected, offering genuine compliments and attention rather than flattery with an agenda. Each act felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable, but it grew easier, more natural, as if she were discovering a side of herself she had long buried. One rainy afternoon she returned to Matthew's shop, not as a prankster this time, but as someone seeking to understand more, to learn how he could see the world with such clarity despite the hardships. Matthew greeted her with the same calm kindness, his face lighting up not with judgment but with a gentle warmth. They talked for hours, not just about money or success, but about life, dreams, fears, and regrets. Victoria realized that the man she had once dismissed as poor held a richness of character she had never encountered in her privileged circles. His joy wasn't found in material things, but in relationships, integrity, and small victories earned through effort and honesty. And as she watched him interact with every person who came through the shop, neighbors, strangers, even children seeking a quick lesson on engines, she understood a profound truth. Wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the ability to touch lives. Weeks turned into months, and Victoria's life transformed quietly but deeply. She began volunteering, mentoring young women who felt lost in the pursuit of material success, sharing lessons she had once scoffed at. Slowly, the admiration she had once sought from others became unnecessary. She had found something more enduring: purpose. One day, Matthew handed her a simple notebook. Inside, he had written down advice, not for her financial gain, but for living with integrity, courage, and heart. Victoria looked at him, tears welling up, overwhelmed by gratitude. The joke she had intended to play had turned into a turning point, a moment that redefined her life completely. And it struck her then: the world often hides its wisest teachers in the most unexpected places. In someone who seemed ordinary, she had found extraordinary wisdom. In humility, she had found strength. And in a single act of listening, she had discovered the path to a richer, more meaningful life than any bank account could ever provide. Before you leave this video, if this story touched your heart, please hit like, comment, and share it. It's these small gestures that remind us all that kindness and understanding can change lives. Take a moment to leave a comment below telling us how a simple act of wisdom or kindness has impacted your life. Stories like Matthew's remind us that greatness isn't always loud or visible. It's quiet, persistent, and life-changing. Victoria walked out of that shop that evening, the rain washing over her, feeling lighter, braver, and more alive than she had in years. The streets no longer seemed like paths to status, but opportunities to make a difference, to be better, to live fully. And she knew deep in her heart that the lesson she had received from a poor mechanic would guide her for the rest of her life.